Hello, wild wanderers and fellow nature nerds. A couple of weeks ago, I got an email asking if I would do an episode on raccoons. So, this episode goes out to Amanda, because today, that's what I'm going to be talking about. The most adorable dumpster divers in the animal kingdom. The sultans of scavenging, the titans of trash, the dukes of detritus and masters of mischief, raccoons. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, and this is the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. Like coyotes, the subject of the last episode, raccoons are intelligent, adaptable, and often misunderstood, although generally not the target of nearly as much animosity as coyotes. Now, mostly I'm going to be talking about the northern or common raccoon. That's the one that's native to North America. There's raccoon species that live in Central and South America, and they've been introduced into several European countries, and they have cousins around the world, like ringtails and kinkajous. But raccoons themselves are ultimately a Western Hemisphere native. Now you probably know what they look like, with their distinctive bushy ringed tail and black bandit mask, which doesn't help their reputation for being just a little bit shady. But their mask is not to hide their identities during a trash heist. In fact, it's thought that raccoons can recognize the facial expression and posture of other raccoons more quickly because of their conspicuous facial coloration and the alternating light and dark rings on their tails. The dark mask also serves to reduce glare and helps enhance their night vision, so kind of like athletes putting dark lines underneath their eyes. Raccoon size varies and follows the Bergmann's rule, something that I've mentioned on this podcast before. They tend to be smaller in the southern part of their range, bigger in the north. In fact, they're one of the most variably sized mammals in the world, with weights that can range anywhere from 5 pounds to 55 pounds. But the average raccoon generally falls between 11 and 25 pounds. And if you listened to the last episode, you know that that's just right for getting eaten by a coyote. The largest wild raccoon ever recorded, though, was about the size of a coyote, a whopping 63 pounds and over 4.5 feet long. Now, also like coyotes, it seems that the spread of raccoons was aided by European colonists. There's evidence that in pre-Columbian times, raccoons were found mainly along rivers and in the deciduous and mixed woodlands of the southeastern United States. Now, I found that surprising given that nowadays, raccoons can be found in the mountains, on the prairies, and in the coastal marshes, not to mention in cities raiding trash cans, from central and southern Canada all the way south through Central America. But early pioneers exploring parts of the central and north-central United States didn't mention raccoons in any of their accounts, so it's assumed that they weren't present there. It seems that in the mid to late 1800s, they started slowly expanding their range. Even up until the 1930s, raccoons were relatively rare, but in the 1940s, they experienced a population explosion. And by the 1980s, their population was 15 to 20 times higher than it had been just 50 years prior. This increase in abundance and distribution was most likely the result of an expansion of agriculture, deliberate introductions, and a reduction in the raccoon's natural predators. Urbanization also helped the raccoon's expansion. Being so adaptable, raccoons survive well in urban areas. The first sighting of urban raccoons was in the suburbs of Cincinnati in the 1920s, but by the 1950s they were present in other metropolitan areas like Washington, D.C., Chicago, Toronto, and New York. Now, part of what makes raccoons so adaptable is their diet. Raccoons are omnivores. In fact, they've been described as the most omnivorous of all animals. Their diet consists of about 40% invertebrates, so things like crayfish, worms, and insects, 33% plant material, especially fruits and nuts like acorns and walnuts, which help them build up fat before winter, and 27% vertebrates. Now, when it comes to vertebrates, contrary to popular belief, raccoons only occasionally eat active or large prey, like birds and mammals. They prefer prey that's easier to catch, like fish and amphibians. When food is plentiful, raccoons can develop a strong individual preference for specific foods. Raccoons can be such voracious predators of eggs and hatchlings of both birds and reptiles that in the case of threatened species, raccoons may need to be removed from the area or nests may need to be relocated to mitigate their impact. So since we're on the topic of diet, let's talk about something raccoons are known for, washing their food. But really, it's all about the hands. The name raccoon is derived from an Algonquin word that translates roughly as animal that scratches with its hands. The Aztecs called raccoons by a word that translates as the one who takes everything with its hands. And their scientific name is Procyon loader, with loader meaning washer. So what's the deal? This behavior is called dowsing, but are they really washing their food? Well, in the wild, raccoons often dabble underwater for food near the shoreline. They'll pick up their catch with their front paws, they'll examine it and rub the item, sometimes to remove unwanted parts. This gives the appearance of the raccoon washing the food. But wild raccoons don't carry other foods to water to wash them. The widely accepted theory is that dowsing in captive raccoons is an instinct that comes from the dabbling behavior performed when foraging at the shoreline for aquatic foods. This is supported by the observation that captive raccoons douse their food more frequently when a watering hole with a layout similar to a stream is no farther away than about 10 feet, and that aquatic foods are doused more frequently. So, cleaning dirty food doesn't seem to be a reason for this washing behavior. I mean, these are animals known for getting into the trash. Did you really think they were that hygienic? But there's another reason for dowsing. The most important sense for raccoons is its sense of touch. Almost 2/3 of the area of the brain responsible for sensory perception in raccoons is specialized for the interpretation of tactile impulses, more than any other studied animal. They can actually identify objects before touching them because they have vibrissa, which are like whiskers, located just above their sharp, non-retractable claws. Their hypersensitive front paws are protected by a stiff layer of cells called a horny layer. Don't blame me, blame science. But this layer becomes pliable when wet, so the sensitivity of the raccoon's paws is increased when they're dabbling in water. Now, just like the size of raccoons, the size of their home range varies by age, sex, and habitat, with adults claiming more than twice as large of areas as juveniles. Scent marking on prominent spots is used to establish home ranges and to identify individuals. Home ranges can overlap and are generally not defended outside of the mating season if food is plentiful. Now, in the prairies of North Dakota, the range of males varied between 3 and 20 square miles, while females claimed just 1 to 6 square miles. For urban raccoons, home range sizes are less than 1/3 of a square mile, about 100 acres for females, and twice that for males. In smaller towns and suburbs, many raccoons will sleep in nearby wooded areas, parks and golf courses or other green spaces, and forage in gardens for fruit and insects, and, of course, get into the trash. In addition to hollow trees like they would use in more rural or wild areas, urban areas also offer a large number of alternative sleeping areas, like cottages, garages, abandoned houses, and attics. The percentage of urban raccoons sleeping in abandoned or occupied houses varies from 15 to 43%. Now, it used to be thought that raccoons were solitary, but studies in the 1990s suggested that this might not be strictly true. One researcher labeled the social structure of raccoons as a 3-class society. So first of all, some are solitary, especially in areas with lower population densities. Females also tend to isolate themselves after giving birth until the kits are big enough to defend themselves because unrelated males tend to be aggressive and kill unrelated kits. Other raccoons divide themselves into sex-specific social groups. Related females might live in what's been termed a fission-fusion society, sharing a common area and occasionally meeting at feeding or resting grounds. Unrelated males, usually not more than 4, may form loose social groups, and this seems to help them defend against other non-group males and other intruders. It's like the raccoon bro code, dude. Urine and feces left at shared raccoon latrines may provide additional information about feeding grounds, since raccoons were observed to meet there later for collective eating, sleeping, and playing. Raccoons usually mate between late January and mid-March, triggered by increasing daylight, except when they don't. According to one author, 10 to 15% of raccoons will do the exact opposite of what's expected. There's large regional differences which are not completely explainable by solar conditions. For example, while raccoons in the southern states typically mate later than average, the mating season in Manitoba also peaks later than usual in March and extends until June. During the mating season, males restlessly roam their home ranges in search of females in an attempt to court them during the 3 to 4 day period when conception is possible. These encounters often occur at central meeting places. Average litter size also varies by region and habitat. Southern raccoons tend to have smaller litters, averaging 2 to 3 kits, while northern raccoons average 4 to 5 kits. Larger litters are more common in areas with a high mortality rate, due, for example, to hunting or severe winters. In the fall, after their mother has shown them where to find dens and food, the juveniles disperse. Many females stay close to the home range of their mother, but males might move more than 12 miles away. But mom and offspring also might share a den during the first winter in very cold areas. Now, raccoons don't hibernate, but they may go into a state of torpor, which is kind of a hibernation light, on very cold days, staying in the den and not doing much just to conserve energy. Generally, they're nocturnal, but they might be out foraging more during daylight hours in the winter just because it's warmer. Raccoons can live 20 years in captivity, but in the wild, the average lifespan is just 2 to 3 years, and it's not unusual for only half of kits to survive a full year. After that point, the annual mortality drops to between 10 and 30%. In areas with heavy traffic and extensive hunting, these factors can account for up to 90% of all deaths of adult raccoons. But the most common natural cause of death is distemper, which can reach epidemic proportions and decimate local populations. Now, next to getting into the garbage, the other thing raccoons are known for is being incredibly smart. As early as 1908, a study found that raccoons could figure out how to open 11 out of 13 complex locks in less than 10 tries, and could repeat this action even when the locks were rearranged or turned upside down. The conclusion was that raccoons understood the abstract principles of locking mechanisms, so good luck keeping them out of your trash can. Further studies of raccoon memory in the 60s, 70s, and early 90s demonstrated that they can remember the solution to a task for at least 3 years. And neuroscientists have found that the density of neurons in the raccoon brain is comparable to that of primates. Now, the biggest problem with raccoons, especially in urban areas, is that they can be vectors for disease. I mentioned just a little bit ago that they are subject to distemper, which can also impact domestic animals like dogs and cats. They can also carry rabies and other pathogens. Raccoon roundworm is a particular public health concern. Over half of raccoons carry this parasite, and it can be contracted by humans through accidental ingestion or inhalation of the eggs, which are present in the feces of infected raccoons. While usually harmless to the raccoon, in humans it causes progressive neurological damage, the symptoms of which are hard to diagnose, and it's fatal if it's untreated. Now, I'm not telling you this to make you hate raccoons or make you think that they're dirty or diseased. In general, the presence of raccoons in an area is not usually a problem, but those shared latrine areas I mentioned or dens in human structures can be. But there's easy ways to mitigate this problem and reduce the risks. Most importantly, don't intentionally feed raccoons, and try not to unintentionally feed them either. Keeping them out of your trash is a whole other problem. Like I said, that can be hard, but I'm talking about leaving food outside for pets, feral cats, or other wild animals. Is it cute to see raccoons and possums and foxes eating on your porch? Sure, but it generally falls under what I would call a bad idea. If you're a regular listener, you know my thoughts on feral and free-roaming cats. They're an invasive species. Wild animals that lose their fear of humans can end up getting themselves into trouble. They're cute when they're eating on your porch, less cute when they den in your attic and it costs you thousands of dollars to remove them and repair the damage they might have caused. And really, really not cute if somebody gets bitten or gets sick because of them. If you've got one where you don't want it, hazing with flashing lights or loud noises can usually get it to relocate. If that doesn't work, call in a professional to trap it and make sure that there's no kits. Okay, my nerdy nature friends, that's where we'll end this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning all about raccoons. They're incredibly intelligent and adaptable animals. And even though, yes, they do carry some diseases, it's pretty easy to reduce the risks by doing your best not to attract them to your house. If you want to support the podcast, you can do that in a number of ways. First of all, check out our Patreon page and consider becoming a patron. You can find all the information at patreon.com/dispatches from the forest. If you want to email me or you want to donate via PayPal, you can do that at dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. It works. Just ask Amanda. If you want some merch, go to the merch store, cafepress.com/shop/dispatches from the forest. Click on products and see everything that the merch store has to offer. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. The Dispatches from the Forest podcast is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.